So starting out in 2017, I'm taking on a number of response videos that I didn't get to in the previous year. And in trying to respond to them, I noticed that they all had a very consistent theme, and that was that they largely revolved around the types of conversations that I think are fruitful to have online and on this channel, and the people that I just don't think are worth engaging with at all. And I know this probably went back to an early interview I had with Dean Esmay in December, and in this interview I think the large disagreement that came up was over whether it was worth engaging with people who are broadly in the new atheist category. Dean Esmay thinks that these people typically aren't worth engaging with on some kind of conversational level, and I have a much more open approach to this question. But even after finishing that conversation, I think a lot of people had questions as to what conversations I would and wouldn't entertain on this channel. I've been known to say that I really have no interest in discussing things with nihilists. I think it's pointless. And there was a question about really where do I draw the line? What are the correct ways to answer this question? What conversations are worth having? And I think really the best way to address this is just to go through and respond to a follow-up video that Dean Esmay did to my channel concerning his questions to me about how I handle atheists and how I engage with new atheists online. And then I think I can incorporate the question about where I see fruitful conversations emerging from, how we can seek common ground, and address the other questions that people brought up to me about nihilism, about extreme cynicism, and about my reticence to having some of those very, very far-out views being discussed broadly on this channel. So I'll just start by playing Dean Esmay, or Escaping Atheism's questions to my channel over atheism and new atheism generally, and give my responses to it. And from that point, I'll just move forward with my own line of questions and answers about how can we have fruitful conversations, what I think this channel is designed to talk about, and really what people I'm just not going to engage with because the conversation would be more or less pointless. So let's start with Dean's questions.
If atheists don't care who they offend, why should anyone care if atheists get offended? I find that atheists indeed are often fond of saying nothing is sacred. But why would we then not take them to mean that honor, honesty, ethics, and integrity are not sacred then?
So I think the first question is just why should we be polite? Why should we engage in conversations with people who we know to be not polite, or people who just have very, very abrasive points of view, views that we think are offensive or off-putting or racist even. And this doesn't apply just to new atheists, it also applies to the extreme progressives, the SJWs, and the extreme right-wing alt-righters, people who we think might be racist or sexist or authoritarian in their positions. Why do we engage in conversation with them? Well, I think the first answer is purely tactical. You have to have these conversations in order to move a discussion forward. Most people on the position of YouTube come from a position of not having the ability to speak directly to the opinion makers. So all dialogue benefits people in this position. We are not university lecturers. We are not scientists in any given field. We do not have national publications backing us. If you want to convince people and convince audiences, the conversation has to first proceed. In order for the conversation to proceed, you have to have an engaged opposition. Hence, some amount of politeness is needed, and even tactical. It's also a little bit tactical if you're trying to convince people of things, too. I know that's cliche that you catch more flies with honey than with vinegar, but it bears some truth there. I think the second response to this question comes from more of a Christian perspective, or at least more of a virtue ethics perspective, and that is that it's not all equal. It's not all ideologies benefit from having a totally contentious and non-polite environment. Some ideologies will flourish in an internet environment where everyone's just F you left and right. No one ever has any conversations that go deeper than screw the other side. That's very useful if you're just trying to push back, or if your ideology is just about pushing back. But if you come from an ideology that's a little bit more sophisticated, that includes spirituality, that includes deep thoughts about human truths, then an environment that is uncourteous, that is totally contentious, where nobody is even trying to see what the other person is really saying, is not going to be conducive to your point of view. And that really holds for Christianity. If we just burn up the dialectic environment of YouTube, we just have a scorched earth policy. In some ways, atheism has benefited from that. Any kind of philosophy of negation has benefited from that, because at the end of the day, people will always be able to say F off. And if you're not polite, you're inching closer to the environment where that's all dialogue is on the internet. And that's not an environment that really benefits any kind of higher ideology. And I very much include Christianity and Catholicism in that category.
When you're talking about people who say nothing sacred, who deny any ultimate right and wrong or meaning in the universe, well, can their integrity then be questioned? Their honor, their ethics, and their integrity. Indeed, again, this is not rhetorical. Given atheists' own statements, why should we not assume betrayal is in the cards whenever you make a deal with one?
All right, so I think the second question really can be boiled down to, well, why don't we take the atheist's word that they don't believe in human dignity, that they don't believe in any kind of metaphysical concept that would impel them to be good or courteous or nice people or even care about human life in some abstract sense? And there might be some truth to this in some sense, but for the most part, the real answer to this is that you can't believe the atheists when they say this. The argument that there is no objective moral good and there's no moral good that really binds them is a totally dishonest position. It's not something that most atheists seriously embrace. The nihilism is tactically embraced so people can avoid the moral argument for the existence of God. They do it so that they can deny all metaphysics, but they don't actually embrace this position. In fact, the second they're in a position where they no longer have to worry about getting some kind of moral argument for the existence of metaphysics or the existence of God, then they will be going to strong moral statements the second they have the opportunity. I mean, this is what I broadly call the Hitchens two-step. Most atheists are not nihilists, and so you don't need to take them at their word because they're obviously misguided in their understanding of this.
And you must have noticed this now. Atheists in the media, and that includes YouTube media, are really big on declaring themselves to be assholes and dicks. I mean, in case you haven't noticed, literally, they do this. They will brag and boast of it. And not just the big-name celebrities, but the YouTube celebrities you and I are both familiar with and talked a little about. They literally brag that they're assholes, and then they get offended when we agree with them.
Well, this next section about atheists being assholes or claiming to be assholes, I'm not so sure how serious this is. If someone says he's an asshole, fine, he's an asshole. But typically people who are so self-deprecating and have a pathological need to embody that, I tend to see it more or less as a cry for help, not something that is some kind of way to dismiss them. I mean, if someone genuinely comes after me with a very personal attack or threatens me, I'm not going to continue the conversation. But there is only so much credence I'm going to give a move that is obviously theatrical. There's a need to appear aloof, like you just don't give a shit on the internet, and we all have to sort of deal with this kind of rhetoric online. I'm not so sure it should really disrupt our conversations in any serious way, though.
You yourself have noticed cultural Marxism. Cultural Marxism, which is what the whole modern social justice movement is rooted in, is probably the most dangerous force in the world politically right now. But what is cultural Marxism but a godless philosophy that hates religion? Hates all religion, calling it bad, anti-science, anti-progress, anti-reason. That's what the social justice left mostly says about religion.
So here I'd like to point out, I mean, the cultural Marxism, the Frankfurt School and all this. The interesting thing about cultural Marxism is not how anti-religious it is. It's not that it derives from Marxism. Everyone knows that critical studies and critical theory derive from Marxism. This is well documented through source citing. The question is not how anti-religious they are. The interesting question, I should say, is how they got such a large amount of power in both the academia and the media establishment. They virtually dominate those sectors. That's the question people should be asking right now. And undoubtedly, the answer is their ability to control narratives and their ability to essentially appear like an ideology that can frankly hold together a multicultural society. And that's why they're in the position they are. They're the ideology that says we're the only people that can make multiculturalism work. And I'm afraid that being an asshole back to them isn't really going to shatter that particular narrative. So, again, I agree it might not be fair, but this is not a particularly productive approach to handling the problem.
Why would people who talk like that expect to get respect? They don't give it, but they should get it anyway?
Well, bluntly, yes. We owe people a certain quantum of respect just for being people. This may be a difference between Christian ideology and our current secular worldviews, but there is a onus on Christians to come at their opponents with a certain amount of respect and mutual understanding of dignity. This is turn the other cheek in action.
Dave, when they talk about sky fairies and invisible friends, they're talking about you. Is it possible that you're remembering your time as an atheist just like I remember mine, and feeling charitable toward your younger, more callow, and more shallow self?
Yes, that's exactly where I'm coming from. I do remember what it was like to be an atheist. I do remember what it was like to be in my late teens and early 20s and not think anything matters. But that's a good thing. That makes me better at engaging in dialogue with atheists and people who disagree with me. In some sense, I look at the far left extremists, the SJWs as they're termed on the internet, and it's almost, I feel sorry for them sometimes because they have no idea what their opponents even think. It's all complete projection. It's all complete hypothesis. I know how atheists think. I sympathize with their perspective because it's a very understandable perspective to have in the modern world. So I guess the answer is yes on this one.
Or might it not be better to recognize openly that you were a fool to be an atheist, and that if you were a fool, so too might these people be fools?
Well, I certainly acknowledge that I was a fool when I was an atheist, but I'm not so sure that I'm not a fool now that I have left atheism behind. Whatever God's true nature is when we come face to face with him, I do hope he is the God of fools.
I bet we would agree. Better a deist, or a pantheist even, than an atheist. Better a Taoist who has a firm sense of God and the right and the good than an atheist.
Yes, I suppose better some deist or better some rational believer in pantheism, but frankly speaking, I'm not so sure that people who call themselves atheists in the modern world are even truly atheists. I think that most of them are some type of deist or pantheist that are culturally affiliated with modern atheists like Dawkins and modern atheists like Hitchens because of their aversion to specific religions, probably Christianity and certainly Islam. I think the beginning of this conversation just has to start with realizing that very few people who call themselves atheists are really atheists, and certainly very few of them are straight up nihilists.
If the atheist is serious about his atheism, then we know he thinks there's no ultimate good or evil, and we know he is at the end of the day likely a moral utilitarian.
And we know people say that, but do they really believe that? Do they really believe that there is no good? And even if they did believe that there is no good and evil, would that make our respect for them contingent on their belief for this? I mean, we can get into my discussion about why I have an aversion to discussing things with nihilists later, but it doesn't really bear on my respect for them as people.
Why should we as theists not assume that the minute the anti-SJW atheists have any power, they'll turn on us and betray us? Why would we not think they would do so? Literally, for God's sake, why would I need enemies when my so-called friends speak of invisible friends in orbiting teapots?
Now, I'm not really so sure what this last question is even directed towards. I'm not proposing that atheists be admitted into the Catholic Church. I'm not proposing that atheists be admitted into some kind of common communion of values. I'm just proposing that we have conversations of mutual respect, that we build friendships with atheists and engage in conversations about mutual concerns. Atheists have any number of values that we might hold in common, and we need to start building common values with them. The fact that they lack our belief in God certainly precludes them from joining the church, but a conversation about why they should believe in God has to precede their admission into the church, or precede them coming to a belief in God. So I feel like we're totally putting the cart before the horse in this perspective. Now, I think this finishes up the responses I had to Dean Esmay's questions. And you may think from this that I must be really opposed to escaping atheism and Dean's project. Really, in some sense, I have a good deal of commonality, and I think this was brought out a little bit in his conflict with Noel Plum. They have a standing disagreement over whether atheism can be considered just a lack of belief and what status this confers on atheism. And I mean, you know, it's sort of a debatable and ridiculous position. You can define atheism as being some positive belief, or you can define it as a lack of belief. But at the same time, just to sort of contrast my pushing back on escaping atheism's perspective from the last segment, I really thought that Noel Plum's opinion was sort of not really getting at the truth. He made a response to this very briefly. I can play it here.
It's one, Max, that you have made again and again and again and again and again, and it's this crap that atheism is an ideology. It's started to get a little bit tiresome. It seems that nearly every video that you make, you come up with this idea, this claim that atheism is an ideology, and you always seem to base it on this same reasoning. And if I can give this reasoning a more general form, it's something along the lines that if a belief places a restriction on you, then non-belief means that you do not have that restriction. And as not having that restriction is liable to impact upon how you think and act, that means that non-belief is an ideology.
Now, okay, so this position that Noel Plum sets out and very vehemently defends is that atheism is just, in fact, the lack of belief. And, okay, fine. Sure enough, you can define it that way. This is just a definitional problem. And there's no right answer in definition questions. That's why they're so meaningless. But there really is a problem here that we're not getting at, and that is the fact that atheists frequently use this negation definition, or this totally negative definition of atheism, to escape criticism. It is impossible to criticize a totally negative idea because there's no substance to it. And just to go ahead and bring forth Noel Plum's example, gentilism. Okay, so there are plenty of critiques of Judaism out there. Has there ever been a critique of gentilism? There hasn't. Because it's not an idea. Judaism is an idea. Judaism is an identity. But gentilism, even though it is a default, even though it is just the lack of something, and even though it applies only to people, therefore escaping the sort of hyperbolic idea that atheism can be applied to rocks or whatever, it's still a negative concept. And there has never been a refutation of gentilism. There's never been a refutation of lack of belief qua lack of belief. Negative ideas can't be refuted. They're just negations of things. And so this creates a space for a lot of intellectual dishonesty. As people have known from my previous videos, I talk a lot about a tactic called the Mott and Bailey doctrine. And this is the idea that you have some ideological position, and the ideological position is not very well defined. There are two definitions, or maybe multiple definitions, or what have you. But the lack of a solid definition allows the person who holds this ideology to do one of two things. Whenever he is out and about preaching his ideology, expounding its virtues, he is able to use very radical versions of the ideology, the ones that have content in them, the ones that you can say, go out and do X because of my ideology, which says that you should do X. But as soon as that person is then challenged on their ideology, as soon as someone tries to mount a criticism of it, they immediately revert back to the other definition, some other definition that's more negative, that's more reserved, that's more moderate, and that's harder to critique. And so they never really have to face up to the ideas that their ideology functionally espouses in the real world. And something there's something very true to that with atheism. Atheists functionally preach a certain idea of secularism, of humanism, of, in some cases, a very nihilistic philosophy in the case of people like Daniel Dennett. But at any rate, they definitely preach positive ideas. And then to retreat back and say that atheism is simply a lack of belief is just disingenuous. That is the Mott and Bailey in action. And I think theists are right to point that out. Now, if you want to say, the way to point that out is to say, well, atheists functionally have the same idea as rocks do, I mean, that's hyperbolic, that's kind of stupid, but it gets to the point. A negative philosophy is not worth discussing because it's fundamentally nothing. You can't refute negation. You can't refute, I don't believe in anything. And therefore, it's not really worth it if someone's going to constantly hide behind that definition, which I hate to say, Noel Plum, people frequently hide behind that negative definition. And it's just as irritating when people do that as when feminists hide behind this idea that feminism just means equality among the sexes, when we all know from experience that feminism means much more than that. Atheism might in some sense mean just a lack of belief, but all believers know from personal experience with atheists that it means much more than that. And so I suppose this brings me to the last segment of this, and that is the ideologies that I will and will not discuss on this channel. Now, after my Escaping Atheism video, some people accuse me of a little bit of hypocrisy. I made the point that I never discuss nihilism on this channel. I don't engage with nihilists, and there are a few other ideologies that I don't engage with. And people said, well, if you disagree with Dean and think that we should engage everyone with courtesy because that's the prerequisite to actually making them convert to your point of view, and that's hypocritical. You're not following your own advice when it comes to nihilists and when it comes to people who have these radical ideologies of pure negation. Well, I suppose there's some point to that, but I think I need to make one clarification here. So broadly, my opposition to discussing ideologies of pure negation on this channel is not really due to my belief that nihilists are functionally assholes or have personally slighted me or they'll betray me, although you could argue that they're a huge detriment to society generally. The problem is just, how do you even have a discussion with somebody who is in possession of one of these philosophies and is non-hypocritically pursuing a philosophy of pure negation? Either they have a philosophy that negates one of the core epistemological or moral premises of any system that you could possibly appeal to, or they just have premises that are so out of line with your own, there'll be no common ground you could possibly explore. And the thing is, there's just no way to functionally run one of these conversations. I'll make a statement, they'll deny it, they'll stand there and ask for proof. And of course, when you're arguing for proof or non-proof for some kind of fundamental moral premise or epistemological proposition, no proof can be given at that level. And the nihilist just gets to be snarky, well, nothing is really gained. No ideas are generated because functionally no ideas can be generated because all there is just a constant force of denial. This is not a productive conversation to have. It's meaningless. It doesn't bring the conversation forward at all. No ideas are generated, and it's just an opportunity for people to be snarky and unpleasant, and nobody's going to get anything from that, either the people having the conversation or the people watching it. Now, just to anticipate the objections by those philosophically consistent atheist nihilists, materialists that are out there thinking, aha, we got the Distributist. This is just an admission of weakness. He doesn't want to have a discussion on us because he knows he can't philosophically justify his moral premises. And I think this is ridiculous. No premises at their basic level can be proven. And it's immediately obvious if you use some simple examples. Let's just say that you were debating against a solipsist, someone who believed that reality wasn't real, that the person they're debating against isn't real, that it's all an illusion, it's all a simulation, as Elon Musk might have it. This is not real. This is the laws of physics are arbitrary. Nothing has any permanence. It's just his own illusions, his delusion, or maybe it's some kind of computer-induced delusion. What kind of conversation would you have with this person? You'll say, X is true. He'll say, no, it's not. It's an illusion. You'll say, Y is true. He'll say, no, it's not. It's delusion. You'll say, we can see this from our senses. He'll say, your illusions are meaningless. He'll say, your senses are illusory. They're meaningless. This is a ridiculous conversation. It leads nowhere. It reminds me of that Monty Python skit, where someone signs up to have an argument and the guy gives him money to pay for the argument he's about to have. And then the guy says, you didn't give me the money. And then the conversation proceeds. Yes, I did. No, you didn't. Yes, I did. No, you didn't.
Did not. Yes, I did. You did not. Yes, I did. Didn't. Yes, I did. Didn't. Yes, I did.
It's just contradictions back and forth ad nauseum, and it's just ridiculous. Conversations are not supposed to be just denials. They're supposed to be actually logical deductions and arguments, and you can't have that if it's just, I deny your premise, you assert the premise, on and on and on and on. That's a meaningless conversation. No one gets anything out of it. And there are other ideologies. Any moral premise, any conversation about morals will be equally ridiculous because nihilists reject all moral premises. All conversations about the real world will be ridiculous from the point of view of a solipsist, and all conversations about politics will be meaningless from somebody of the perspective that humanity is some kind of disease that needs to be eliminated off the face of the earth. If you hate existence and you hate humanity and you think humanity is evil, then any common premise we have over how to properly conduct political discourse or how to properly lead humanity into the future is going to be meaningless because you think humanity is evil and wrong and should be destroyed. So it's just going to be one of these ridiculous Monty Python statement and then denial things.
An argument is a connected series of statements to establish a definite proposition. No, it isn't? Yes, it is. It isn't just contradiction.
Now, I just to reference one of my favorite books here, this very question came up in the introduction of a very marvelous book called Orthodoxy by G.K. Chesterton. Chesterton is the icon of this channel, and I'll read what he had to say when he set out to elucidate his own positive philosophy. And he said, the thing I propose not to prove, the thing I propose to take as common ground between myself and any average reader, is the desirability of an active and imaginative life, picturesque and full of potential curiosity, a life such that Western man at any rate has always seemed to have desired. If a man says that extinction is better than existence, or that blank existence is better than variety and adventure, then he is not one of those ordinary people to whom I am talking. If a man prefers nothing, I can give him nothing. And that's really all there can be said about this. If people have no common premises, even at the very basic level, there's not going to be a conversation, and it's not worth it. It's just a waste of people's time. I'm willing to talk to atheists. I'm willing to talk to anybody of any divergent ideology from Islam to Jehovah's Witness. But part of that is the assumption that in their core soul, they embrace some of the premises of morality, of a desire for existence, of a desire for a transcendent meaning to existence. And without those common grounds, I'm not so sure what a discussion's even going to be based on. So at any rate, I think that brings to the close this rather rambling response to what conversations I think are worth having on this channel. You can feel free to leave me comments in the comment section. This was a really haphazard video, but I hope people got something out of it. And I hope this also clarifies why, if you're a nihilist or a humanity-hating moral cynic, you're not going to get a platform on this channel. I'm sorry. So have a great 2017, and I'll be seeing you in upcoming videos.